Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician. Right now, upstairs at the Sheraton Hotel, obviously Canadian Music Week 2016 is going on. A huge presence this year by Australian artists in the Australian music industry. And here to speak about that is Glenn Dickie, I keep saying executive, but export music producer at Sounds Australia, which Sounds Australia's role is to provide international opportunities for Australian artists around the world. I'd say kind of similar to what Music Export Canada does in a way for Canadian artists, or am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, we're like the Australian Music Export Office.
Yeah, exactly. And but first, Glenn, is this your first time at CMW, or how's the experience going so far?
No, this is, I think, my fourth or fifth.
Oh, really?
I don't know, I'm not even sure. Yeah, it's about 4 or 5. It's probably 3 now that I've said 4 or 5. It's going well so far. So it feels like it's only just starting. Like last year I came in early. I was here because we did a Song Hubs last year, which was between with APRA, which is our collection society, and SOCAN here in Canada. So we did a Song Hubs where we combined Australian songwriters and musicians with some Canadian songwriters and musicians, and did a songwriting kind of camp.
Yeah.
Here in Toronto just before. So this year we've just kind of I've flown straight in from London, and Esty's come in straight in from Australia, and we're at it again.
For Canadian Musician, like our focus is obviously musicians, but also just the Canadian music industry, the business of being a musician in Canada. We do a lot of talking about touring internationally, but also touring just this vast kind of sparsely populated country of ours that makes it very costly and more difficult than touring a place, say, like the United States. How does that compare to like Australia? I know Australia is similar to Canada in the sense that, again, is a very large country landmass-wise, but not necessarily population-wise. So what difficulties are there for Australian musicians, especially how separated you guys are, both domestically but also internationally?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many similarities between Australia and Canada. Like you said, it's that massive landmass. Our continents are pretty much exactly the same size. Yeah. Well, you've got 34 million population. We've got 24, so you're just kind of above us in that respect. You've got, you've kind of got a little bit of a touring route that you can go from East Coast to West Coast. You can go through, Manitoba and all that kind of area, whereas for us, it's just like it's desert in the middle, and there's not really anything that you can do in there.
Like north, no one goes up there.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So our most of our infrastructure is East Coast. Like you'll go from like, I would say that Melbourne would probably have the most densely population of venues, and then you would do Sydney, and then up to Brisbane. So you would do that kind of East Coast side of things. There's a little bit in South Australia in Adelaide, but not a whole lot at the moment. That's still kind of developing. And then you've got Perth. Perth is the most Western Australia shouldn't isolate it to Perth, but Perth is the most isolated capital city within the world, apparently. So but that's where like your Tame Impalas and those kind of artists come out of. It's so our infrastructure and our geographical setup is very similar to Canada, which does make it hard, both domestically, to be able to, you don't really drive anywhere. There's not those tours that you stop in between to get from Melbourne to Sydney. So you kind of fly everywhere, and I think that would be the same for here. Our dollar's on par. Pretty much, you're doing a little bit better than us at the moment. We share the same plastic money essentially. So when you kind of like Melbourne, Toronto, feels a little lot like Melbourne. Vancouver feels a lot like Sydney. You come here, and Australians feel very, very familiar when we come to Canada, and I think the same happens when Canadians come to Australia, especially within the folk music world.
It's funny, like a lot of artists that we speak with, Canadian artists, seem to do almost disproportionately tour Australia. It seems to be a big destination for them. And like I was even just speaking to a Aboriginal folk duo, Digging Roots, who spent 2 months in Australia. And but from your perspective, having that, I guess, outsider perspective of the Canadian industry and the insider perspective of Australia, do you have a sense of why it is that international artists, but maybe specifically Canadians, are maybe disproportionately coming to Australia? What is it there that's attracting them?
I don't know that it's disproportionate when you're in Australia, because everybody seems to want to come to Australia, especially if you come from somewhere that snows. It's just like, hang on, it's snowing. I'm going to the hot place. So yeah, I don't know whether it's disproportionate. I think that it's our colonized, like our old English heritage it's just that familiarness. The familiarity, a word that I have struggled saying. When we kind of get there, it just does feel kind of normal. And like I said, within the folk music world especially, there is so many parallels, and there's so much communication between artists and festivals within that world as well. Like everything from Canadian Music Week or Folk Alliance International, even South by, I guess, to a certain degree. Those kind of things have kind of, I guess, helped. It helped with the Canadians' ability to come into Australia in a sense.
Another similarity of the moment between Australia and Canada is that both countries are kind of experiencing, I guess, forgive the pun, but their moment in the sun in a way. As far as
it's not a moment in the sun. It's like it's just. I take issue to people thinking that we're not going to just rule the world from here on in. It's just like, this was just the beginning. It just took a while. Midnight Oil are about to go on tour again. It's all going to be good. It's like, all of the Canadians and the Australians, and it seems like the Koreans at some particular point in time. I can't see us going backwards from here. It's now we've hit our stride. We're going forward,
and that's how highlighted by people like Tame Impala. My favorite album of the last year, frankly, was Courtney Barnett's album, and same in Canada. Obviously, we're having as well our own domestic stars breaking huge internationally. But I'm wondering, like, I see a lot of the background that goes on in Canada behind these success stories. But in Australia, is there a strategy that had laid the groundwork for this kind of international success for Australian artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think we both benefited from the global financial crisis.
Interesting. Like how so?
Well, our dollars kind of, both the Canadian dollar and the Australian dollar kind of stayed buoyant. We suddenly were on parity with the US, which hasn't happened in years. We haven't, to the pound, we're at 80 cents rather than 49 cents, which gave us both the ability, probably you guys way more than us, being able to go and tour into America, create foundations and lay the groundwork where we haven't been able to do that before. You've got your things like your Canadian Blasts, and we've got our events that we do that were able to really capitalize. The industry itself was able to mobilize and get into the areas that we weren't able to get into just because our dollar was going further. I think that global financial crisis built the foundations and allowed us to then kind of just show people that we're willing to travel, that we're serious, and that that you can book an Australian actor and a Canadian act. You can sign an Australian act and a Canadian act and know that we're going to be doing the same amount of business as somebody in the US or in the UK. I mean, it's a lot harder now, but I think that Australians and Canadians, you go to any backpackers and, we make up the majority of people in those backpackers anywhere in the world. And I think that sense of travel and that sense of being able to get on the road and tour and not being afraid to leave our own country really has the global financial crisis and our dollar being on parity and our ability to be mobile and agile and show that we are experienced. That to me was really good foundation. We already had the infrastructure in place from our different societies, and the music has always been good. So that wasn't an issue. We just needed the financial ability to get in front of people.
Now that the dollar's back up, I know that's an interesting perspective, by the way, the fact the impact that the recession had and the dropping of the American dollar. I hadn't really heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense. But I know in Canada we're very affected by the fluctuations in currency, and right now we're after that, I guess, high in the Canadian dollar that you were just talking about. It's now at a low again, which is impacting tours and is especially impacting festivals and that kind of thing. Were you guys able to build up enough momentum within the Australian industry that you're able to keep that going now that it's, I guess, maybe gone back to its more traditional American dollar being higher and the British pound being higher than it was?
Yes. Yeah, because it gave people confidence. Like, I think, Canadians and Australians, we're nice. Yeah. We're nice people, and that sometimes is to our detriment where we're too laid back, especially as Australians, we're a bit too laid back. It's just like, hey, what do you do? It's I'm in a band. It's a band. What are you called? We're Tame Impala. It's like like our sense of like self-deprecation kind of thing is it means that we could sometimes don't go out there with the confidence. And I think that because we were all going out there en masse, it was a strength in numbers kind of thing that gave a sense of confidence to the whole industry. You know, managers, artists, festivals, all those kind of things. So I think that confidence is the thing that's now solidified it and made everybody more confident. And it's you're probably seeing the same thing here. There was a lot of acts that were probably being asked to play at different festivals and stuff like that weren't ready to go. You know, but the dollar was on parity, so it's just like, it'll be a nice holiday. The dollar's back down now, but the bands that have already kind of gone in there and made done significant groundwork, and the managers that were able to travel probably a lot more than they were before. That confidence and that ability to be able to go in has sort of separated the wheat from the chaff a bit. Now you've got those acts that are really ready to go. You're not wasting money anymore. Like, okay, no, I know I'm going to go because I'm going to be spending $50,000 on this trip, but I know that I've got the right connections. I know that people are interested and that we can make our money back. Because the thing is, when the dollar's down, when you do start making money through, like, I guess if you're getting radio play or, you know, your mechanical royalties and your festival offers and stuff like that, you're getting paid in American or getting paid in euro or getting paid in pounds, then that translates to much more money in Canadian and Australian dollars. So that's the flip side of it.
Yesterday, one of the delegates that was part of it was one of the early sessions. I think it was like the State of the Global Music Industry was called. And one of the delegates from Australia had mentioned that last year in Australia, I think it was, I could be wrong, I think it was 11 or maybe even more than that, Australian albums hit #1 on the charts in Australia. And I know in Canada, historically it's always been, and it's changed over the last 10 years, but it was always a challenge to get Canadians to embrace Canadian music before it broke elsewhere, to have pride in their own music as a domestic cultural product. How did that happen in Australia? In order for 11 Australian albums to hit #1 in Australia, Australians must be embracing their own music and be proud of their own music. Like, what kind of cultural education went on to make that happen?
Oh, good question. I mean, you've probably got the same thing here. Like, I don't know, outside of Drake, you know, and maybe Action Bronson, like, you know, Canadian hip hop is probably more popular in Canada than it is anywhere else in the world. Australian hip hop doesn't translate anywhere else. So I think that there's maybe 4 or 5 of the #1s were Australian hip hop records. So you're not going to necessarily see that anywhere else in the world. But I think, you know, it's Triple J, we have an amazing national radio network in Triple J that is, you know, can be both good and bad depending on how you're looking at it, whether you get at it or not, I would assume, as an artist. But that kind of does a lot of the time help to drive those sales and help you know, boost the culture of loving Australian music. I think we've just got great music now. Like, there's a lot of great records being made. It's just like, I don't know that it's anything like, besides the Australian hip hop thing, I think there was just some really amazing records that were coming out, and they just happened to come out at a time when there was, you know, when kind of Sia wasn't releasing a record, or Beyonce wasn't, or Prince didn't die, or something. I don't know if you're saying, I don't know enough about what's going on in the local kind of charts to do a comparison, but I think it's, you know, people are getting used to being loyal to Australian. Like, it's, I don't know, it's probably it's probably the same as TV. Like, you know, I don't know what Canadian TV is like, but we were brought up on American and UK TV with high production values and stuff like that. I think the production values of music has gone up exponentially now that people can file share between studios all over the world, and you're getting access to people all over the world to kind of boost the levels of production. So it's a bit of national pride there, and
lastly here, and this is just kind of piggyback off of what you were just saying, but in Canada, the Canadian government has just announced, for the first time since '91, they're going to do a full-scale review of all broadcast laws and policies. And in Canada, we have very high quotas. It's called, you know, the CanCon regulations, as far as high quotas of Canadian content that must be on terrestrial radio and on television. And I believe there's a similar system of quotas. Correct me if I'm wrong, in Australia.
Similar, not as good.
Not in, and but yeah, they're going to be doing a full review of that, and it's kind of long overdue within the broadcast and television and music industries. There's long been a debate of how can or should these regulations translate into the digital era that they weren't designed for. Is there a similar debate going on in Australia?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a global debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like everybody's trying to adapt to the new ways of thinking and how it affects everybody. You know, everything's globalized, everything is digitized. Yeah. So I think that's everywhere. And those older businesses that have been around for a long period of time, they don't necessarily want to change their business model, just because it's logical. So I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to go into the specifics. I really just don't know enough about it. But I mean, those kind of things are happening everywhere. There's always discussions with radio stations. I really like the system that you guys have got here. That if you, as long as, because it helps us as well. Mm-hmm. If you write or record it as an Australian, if you write a song with a Canadian or you record in a Canadian studio, you makes it. Yeah. What's it called? Is it called Maple or?
The system as far as deciding what counts as CanCon is it's a Maple system, MAPL, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head here, but it's like music, artist, production. Yeah, exactly. Google it. There you go.
But it's I mean, what a great system, and I think if every country did that, it encourages co-writing, it encourages people, but it also just means that you've got your content. If local content is still high, while still having being able to have an international flavour to it as well. I think that's a really great system to have.
Right on. And Glenn, I know it's always busy at CMW and just these kinds of events in general. So I really appreciate you. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's fascinating, man.
Yes,
and
so much.
No, makes my job easier. And but seriously, I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for making the time, man.
No worries, and please do look us up at Sounds Australia, and if we do travel a lot, and Australians are everywhere. Sorry about the ones that might be at Whistler. Sometimes they can probably be a bit annoying. My cousin used to be there, So look out for the Aussie Barbecue and Sound Gallery and all our different events, and we will welcome you with open arms as Canadians.
Right on. Glenn Dickie from Sounds Australia. Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it. Cheers.
Good.